point? If not, by voice, could we vote on the nomination? All in favor, say A. All, aye, or whatever. All opposed, nay. Looks like congratulations, Ms. Gordon.
Thank you, Jerry. A or nay?
A or nay? Good or bad?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the confidence the committee has in me to be your chair. We do have a quorum, and so our second item of business is that I would like to ask Councilmember Blues to continue as the vice chair of the committee. Would you be willing to do that?
I'd be honored to serve, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We will then get on with our business this January the 20th. And our first item of business is the electrical inspector fee, which is actually coming back to us for review of the information that we have. And Councilmember McCord put this into committee, and he is actually not here. So I'll call on, I see Acting Commissioner Mike Webb, and I know that Building Inspection Director Dewey Crow is here, and Steve Vickroy is here, so I welcome you.
Just to kind of share an overall of what we did, one of the first things we tried to do was meet with our contractor, had a discussion with them concerning their proposal, and requested some additional information from the contractor, which would involve increase in expenses over time since they had this contract. I believe the first award of this contract was in 2001. And we requested that information as just a support information to help evaluate the inspection fees that were going out there, that were going out to the customers. Another thing that we did is we took a look at the new construction information that we have really good data on and created a small study, if you will, of how our inspection fees for that work compares to our neighbors that are surrounding us as a comparison tool for where we are today. And then we met with purchasing and our legal department as to what we could do with the existing contract, what might be appropriate. All of those activities have taken place. The information we did request from our contractor, you won't see it included in what we have to share with you today. However, we became aware of something that's happening as far as permits in our review, and we'll have a recommendation for you. The information we received from them, we met with them on November the 4th, and the information we received from them actually came in after our last meeting. The last time we met with our group was January 9th, and that was delivered to my office on January 12th. Did not have adequate time to evaluate it as far as the study goes, but I still think we have some pertinent information to share with you all, and if you don't mind, I will turn it over to Dewey Crow to share that spreadsheet information.
Very good. Thank you very much. Welcome, Mr. Crow.
Good afternoon. I've got a little information. You have this information in your packet. You also had a lot of spreadsheet data. I'm actually going to put up on the overhead the last sheet where all that information is condensed, and we'll have it overhead. You also had it in your packet, and I will just go through it once.
Before you start, will you at some point get for our committee members a larger version of the first page, which is the comparison for Lexington and surrounding cities and counties? For those of us who have multi-year old eyes,
Well, I'm one of those myself.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. The information we have up there now is the comparison for new residential. And what we wanted to look at was as many full years of data that we could put together, which is 2006, 2007, and 2008. What we did was looked at permits in our that we had issued in 2006 and 7 and 8 that pertained to, as best we could tell, the construction of single-family homes, townhouses, and 1 and 2 family duplexes as well, where we thought we could get a good base number and apply that and just see what had occurred over those years as far as how much, what the fee was and how much revenue might have been generated off those permits that we selected of each one of those years. Now, obviously, this does not include all electric inspections that would have been done. It's just a snapshot of a particular set of inspections that would have occurred. And if you look at the table there on 2006, the top, it says estimated average electrical inspection per unit. We came up with that $90.10 amount by taking kind of an average size home of, I believe we looked at the cost, say a $200,000 home, something typical that might have been being built about that time. And we kind of took an average square footage for that and came up with what we thought might be a typical electrical inspection fee. Now, again, those fees do vary by each property based on the particular size and various other things, but we just took that as an average, and we come up with $90.10. If you look at we totaled up the permits, units, construction cost, square footage, and we come up with the average construction cost of $140,000, square foot of $2,421, and that's what that's based upon. Adding up those for that particular segment, it would have generated average inspection fees of $159,477. If you look at 07, that number changes. The average inspection fees now drop to $114,878. And again, in 08, they have dropped even further to $67,575. So there's a decline going on there based strictly on building permits for that type of construction. As you're all well aware, the housing industry and housing market has dropped considerably over that time frame. So we just wanted to illustrate what the total fees might have been for that specific set of data. And as you see, it has fallen significantly since 2008. We also took the average electrical inspection fee down below that for different communities. We conducted a separate study. The contractor had done a study himself. We also followed up with contacting these various cities within the state, Paducah, Georgetown, Scott County, Clark County, Nicholasville, Bowling Green, Owensboro, Frankfort, Madison, Richmond, and Louisville, Jefferson County to get what their fees would be for that particular size or theoretical average sized single-family home. And as you see across, as you read across that first group, you can see they run all the way from $60 in Paducah to $160 in Louisville, Jefferson County. Then we took that one step further, and we said, well, if those counties did the same volume of single families as what we based our upper average fee number on, how much money would they have generated? And as you can see, that's spread out from lowest being Paducah to highest Louisville, Jefferson County. And that was just over 1 year. That was over the 2008 year. We didn't do it for all the 06. But just to give you an indication of how that same set of numbers would play out over different metropolitan areas. Now, if we can switch to the other. Then we looked at the commercial side of things. And we had to take, and there's a lot of data was in your packet where we basically generated permits for all types of various commercial projects, and they run the gamut across the board. We tried to take electrical inspections for commercial work, and we assumed over over a $50,000 cost on that, which is what commercial fees are based upon. And we took the total numbers of our permits for, again, each of the 3 subject years. We totaled up the total construction cost and total square footage. As there's no real definitive method to determine what the electrical cost would have been for any one project other than the data that comes back to the contractor as to what those bids were, what the total cost of materials and goods were. That's what that fee is based upon. We didn't have that data. So we kind of talked to various industry folks and come up with a 15% number for total cost of construction for the electrical component. We had the total estimated cost of construction as part of our permitting process. So we took that 15% number and took that times the total construction cost and generated the percent of construction work for any 1 year of electrical work, and then took 1% of that, which is the kind of the average cost of electrical inspections. As you can see, and again, this is does not in any way reflect what may or may not have been generated as far as inspection fees, because there are lots of other fees that come in there. There are re-inspections, there are service change out, there are numerous things that we don't have data on. We could only apply the data we have based on permits. So again, these are just as a general reflection of what has happened within that particular within commercial overall. And as you see, we come up with a number of revenue there of $39,900 in 06, $46,920 in 07, and $23,188. Now, 07 is a little bit of an anomaly. There were some large projects that skewed the average. So it went up, but it went up because of some, I think we had some schools built and some other very large square footage projects, high-cost commercial jobs that skewed the numbers on 2007. So you did see we're showing an increase there, but if you remove those projects, you would have dropped back to show basically a downtrend from the 39,400 in 06. And again, as in 2008, 23,188. We again applied that across the board to the various other jurisdictions that we have data on, and generated numbers. Some of those we could not, based as how they do their fees. So, and that would have been, Frankfurt was one of those, and Louisville, Jefferson County was one. We could not, get an accurate number. There was no, because they do it differently. They go by circuits and amps and things like that, which we wouldn't have data on, could not get a reasonable number on. But as you see from that, Paducah came in on that same set at $12,600 and a high at Owensboro at $34,783. And that would have been, again, for the 2008 data. So when we were generating $23,188, the other communities were generating a low of $12,600 to a high of $34,783 in Owensboro. This was just to give you kind of an idea and just a snapshot of particular work within the residential section and a snapshot of particular work within the commercial section and what it may have generated as far as inspection fee revenue for the contractor. Again, it certainly doesn't indicate that's what they actually generated. It certainly doesn't take into account every single job. There are probably literally hundreds of other inspections that they conducted other than what this would have reflected. So we don't not intending it to be an accurate number of how much they actually made, because that's not what the data is there for. Any questions on that?
Were you going to make any comment about the fee comparison slide?
Which one is that?
It's page 1 of the packet, and it actually is difficult to read. I don't know if you want to point out anything on this.
That's the one where we compared to the current fee to their proposed. Mm-hmm. I believe there's been and that's probably not applicable to what they are requesting today. I believe they have now amended their request on how much the fee they are requesting is, and I will leave that to the contractor to go a little bit more in depth. So that chart really does not reflect what they're asking for as of today. That, we based that on their previous request. Again, we didn't have time to regenerate all that the information and create a new version of that. So it's really not applicable to what they're requesting as of today.
Okay, so that's great, because we can't read it anyway.
I understand.
Thank you.
I
That
sympathize with your problem.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll ask council members, if you have a question, please log on. And before we go to questions from what Mr. Crow said, I did want to welcome Councilmember Feigl to the Planning Committee. We're very happy to have you as a member. Yes, yes. So are there any questions of Dewey Crow before we move on about what he presented? Nope, it doesn't look like any questions yet, so please go ahead.
In making any type of recommendation for this contract, I learned some information as we sat down. Felt like we needed to speak with purchasing about what we could do, and also the legal department. And I've asked Brian Markham to attend today to answer your questions, and also Dave Barberry, and they're in the audience here. But I can say briefly that this contract, if you're not familiar with how this is bid, this contract is different from a lot of contracts that you think about in competitive bidding. The price is set, and then contractors bid on it. Those fees are set by ordinance, so there is not an opportunity to move up or down for those fees. So you have a group of people, and what the bidding of this contract really goes back to, as you select a contractor, is selecting, since the fee is all the same, the contractor that has the skills, abilities, and has demonstrated that they can manage and handle this type of work. I think that's an important thing to note. This was also a contract that is a one-year contract that is set up with 5 one-year renewals with notice by either party to end the contract, therefore put it out for bidding again, and learn some additional information about problems that we had last time this was bid. The government ended up in litigation over the selection of the contractor, and also learn some information about the terms of the contract and how specifically the notice and why the notice for ending the contract at the end of any contract year, the purpose of that. And based on the discussions that we had with both purchasing and legal, they were in consensus that to change the fee, the appropriate thing to do for our current contractor would be to give notice and end the contract to allow it to be bid again. And that's an area I thought that you all may have questions on. So that is one thing. We can stop and talk about questions, but I would also like, if you all have questions on that, we have them in the audience today. If you want to ask questions about the reason for giving notice and moving forward with a new contract.
Councilmember Beard has a question.
Yes, Mike, just a second. How does that process actually work? You end the contract. Is there a gap in there somewhere, or do you?
The contractor must give written notice, or the government must give written notice. At the end of the contract, I believe there's 30 days notice. Brian can explain that to you. We did not include this in the packet, and I realize you all may be interested in that contract, so I actually made copies if you'd like a copy of it.
You know, knowing that the bidding process sometimes takes time, I just wonder if
Yes.
there's a gap in there or some emergency clause that allows us to go forward for X number of days.
I would like to stress that we are very pleased with the current contractor that is doing this work. To my knowledge, there are no issues with the work, their ability to respond. And we, in fairness to the other the other groups that have bid or may bid on this, I look to Brian to communicate to the group that I put together what is appropriate moving forward. And basically, what I was told was that to change that fee, we probably should end the contract and increase the fee and allow additional bidding. However, in speaking with Dave Barberry and this group, there is one thing that became painfully clear, I'm sure it was to you too, when you just look at the new commercial and new residential, how the numbers of permits have decreased over the last couple years. The way this contract is written, it requires the contractor to have 5 full-time inspectors. And if this trend continues, what we are doing is really, we are limiting what the contractor can make on the contract by making him have people on his staff that he may not be able to produce revenue with. And we would recommend, if you take a look at that, I believe that is set on page 3 at the top, and that's under miscellaneous or services. It's item B. Organizations shall employ 5 full-time electrical inspectors. And our recommendation to help support the current contractor without doing a fee in the change would be to reduce that number and come up with a mechanism where it can be further reduced if it needed to allow him to adjust his number of employees by the work that he's actually experiencing in the field. We had worked on a little wording if the planning committee was interested in us pursuing that and working with Dave Barberry, but we think that is a legitimate way to reduce his expenditures.
And I would agree, but that begs another question then, and that what happens when volumes go back up again? Do we have to go through another process, or is there any way to index that to?
In part of this section, there is a requirement to be able to perform inspections with the numbers of your employees within 24 hours. That we feel, and again, we would have to propose some wording and bring it before you for an amendment to the contract. But if we were to do this, we build in a mechanism where the customers did not suffer while we were waiting for this to happen. It would take a little more time going even smaller. But we think that is a legitimate area. One of the things, and this was not included in the packet, this was actually delivered to my office, and this is the second information that Dewey had spoke about. It was delivered to my office on January 12th. You can see it was dated December 26th, the actual letter. There is one thing that I know it was not in your packet and we didn't intend to go there, but there is some pertinent information I think is important for you all to share with you all in order to make best use of your time, if I could distribute this.
Yes.
I won't go through the entire thing.
And we also have a question from Councilmember James. Do you want to go ahead with your question, or?
Yes, Madam Chair, I will. My question, Mike, is probably a legal question as you refer to making a change and under the services and item B, being that this was probably part of the RFP that went out when everyone bid on this?
Yes, ma'am.
Originally. Where within this agreement or within our rules does it talk about making amendments to agreements without putting that out back for full bid again or proposal
I
again?
would defer to Dave.
Okay.
Brian here.
It's in section 9.2, changes and additions. And if that had not been in there, it would have been much more suspect to do this.
Okay.
But it does allow for that. And once again, what Mike was saying is the award was not predicated on fees at all. It was really on selection criteria. It was more of an RFP process for services. And there were several categories that they had to comply with. And there was some litigation, but really it was just about our process. And all that, was shot down, I guess, so to speak, in the Court of Appeals. So our process was good in how we went about the selection. Changing this number of inspectors really does not put this language in this contract in any jeopardy, as long as we have the ability to increase the number of inspectors when the volume of permits require that. So.
Okay. And I guess thank you for drawing my attention to Section 9.2, because kind of what I was envisioning was, a contractor that only had 2 but wasn't even able to respond to the RFP if the initial request was 5. So that's just kind of what I'm worried about. But if our law department can stand behind the changes here, then that's what I will go with, if our law department agrees with that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Councilmember Beard had more questions.
One more question. It involves our changing our mode of our slant toward encouragement of infill and redevelopment, and whether those types of electrical jobs, which have to be re-inspected, create more of a challenge, less of a challenge, or the same challenge as new construction, and whether they I would guess that it's probably 2 or 3 times as hard to inspect
Are you referring to when they basically were rehabbing an existing structure?
Let's take South Limestone, for instance, past between Maxwell and High Street, the work that went on there. As an example, that type of work, in other words.
Well, speaking from the building inspector standpoint, yes, it's always much more difficult to inspect and verify construction when you're talking about rebuilding and remodeling and adding on to existing structures, particularly older structures. They do present additional challenges as far as performing a correct inspection on those and the issues they'll run into in dealing with that. And as far as the electrical perspective, Sandy Jones is the chief electrical inspector. He's here, and he could probably address how much more difficult it is to do those type inspections as far as the electrical work. But as an overall thing, yes, it is more of a challenge both to building inspectors and anybody doing that it's inspecting those type things. You run into situations where it's very difficult to get things to code. There has to be ways worked out to accomplish that, so you are meeting code and are providing the protections under the code, but at the same time allowing those type of rehabs and infill and reconstruction and redevelopment of those older properties to go forward. So from the building inspector standpoint, it certainly is an additional challenge for us, and I would feel that the electrical inspectors face the same types of challenges on those type projects. But again, I would defer to them for a little more specifics.
I guess my question further goes as to whether there's some way to categorize so that we can be fair in relationship to the pricing of the inspection, or whether that's just embedded and not visible to anyone.
You would probably have to break out that into another category of inspection. If you're talking about compensating at a higher level for those inspections on those types of structures, which may require more time or take more effort on the part of the inspector to accomplish in a proper manner, those would probably have to be a separate group of fees within the electrical inspection fee category. But it could probably be done, yes.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was headed. If, in fact, this continues and we have, 5 years ago, 80% and 20%, and now we're going to have 50-50 or whatever, it looks like it could be significant difference enough to
Well, they could
warrant.
you could certainly break those fees out as to new residential versus existing residential. And of course, if you're just, I don't believe there's a lot of additional involved if you were to say just adding a room addition to a typical three-bedroom home, because that's basically treated as new construction. It's fairly straightforward. It's where you get into these more complicated projects where you're redoing the whole structure, but you're still trying to maintain the integrity of that structure as it was originally built, and certainly the look, and that's obviously very important too in historic districts as well. So there is a definite challenge there for those, and I believe that could be broke out and spelled out separate as a separate inspectional item.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Feigl?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Forgive me as I try to get up to speed.
No problem.
I might ask some questions that have already been answered. Certainly handing out the RFP answered my first question, because I really wasn't certain that we contracted out the inspections.
Yes, it isn't.
Okay, so that satisfied that first question. Was the increase in fees anticipated when we sent out the RFP?
That I will defer, but one thing that I would share with you, in the original document that our contractor presented, his attorney presented, they indicated that there were a number of attempts since 2001 to get this fee increased. And that was part of the reason that I felt like it was necessary for us to develop some type of spreadsheet tool to take a look at where we are today compared to the people around us. And that is not a perfect tool because these fees vary a little bit and you have to make a few assumptions. It is still a tool to say this group of people are very similar to us.
Well, I guess my question really is, would we have received more bids if the fees had already been restructured before we sent it out?
Because I was not in this position, I would defer, if you don't mind, to our purchasing department.
I don't really think that we would have received more bids. We received 2 as it was. The issues really are underlying in the qualifications of this proposal, in that you must have an established entity that has performed this kind of work, so that we understand that we're not going to have a major problem if we change contractors midstream. So the amount of participation is limited by the fact that there are only a couple of municipalities in the state that do it this way and have all their electrical services contracted like this. So what happens is the other proposer was someone who put together a bunch of inspectors, but they had never performed a contract of this nature in any other city, because really it's limited to the amount of cities that it's available. One of the suggestions was that they try to pool some counties together to show that they have a demonstrated ability to deal with the permitting of this and the inspection types that we need to be done. So I don't know that to me, fees set outside and then the proposal is different. It really it requires the number of inspectors, the number of vehicles. And so I don't know that, I can't, truthfully say that there would be more, but I don't believe, it's not anticipated that there is another entity out there that does this in the state.
Now, forgive me for not knowing your name.
I'm Brian.
Brian Markham, Director of Purchasing.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I guess my concern is that when the RFP went out, we had certain facts in front of those who wanted to bid, and now we're changing several of the facts, one being that we aren't requiring as many inspectors to be available, and secondly, that the fee structure is now changed. So that, I just had some really some concerns about that.
I think probably what's not come to the forefront yet is that we're not going to recommend a fee change at this time.
Okay.
And so I think, and I don't know if Mike wants to talk on this, but what we had sort of talked about was the fact that if we want to make a fee change, we make it at the end of a year, at the end of the term. and then at that point, we can put another RFP back out. At that time, that's really, once again, I'm trying to me, we made a recommendation based upon qualifications, not on fees, so sometimes it's difficult for me to keep those separate, but I think that was the recommendation that Michael was going to bring, was that we wait until the end of a term if that's how we want to proceed with adjusting the rates.
Okay, thank you very much.
The end of the contract, is that what you mean, Brian, by term? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes,
Okay.
by using
Okay.
the terms of the contract to
Okay.
do that.
And Councilmember Beard?
Again, Brian, while I have you up to the microphone, there's one thing that I just got to ask. February 2003, ice storm, and a load of requirement for inspections. What did we do at that point? Do you remember? Or
Yeah, I do. Actually, there was an influx of requests, and the contractor that we currently have, Commonwealth, hired additional inspectors to deal with the workload, because it is in there that they must respond, so they had to hire additional staff at that time to deal with the number of requests that they had. And Sandy may want to speak more to that, because I'm not sure of the volume and things like that, but that's how that was handled.
They were additional contract help that they
Yes,
they
they
hired.
used-
But where did it come from, I guess is the question.
Well, you have a lot of, I guess, retired electrical inspectors in the state, and basically any of those that have their certifications can perform this type of work, so they hired people like that had the qualifications.
Okay, it's primarily the masts that were pulled down, I think, that was where most of that activity was, but
That's right.
at the same time, just all of a sudden flick a switch and people are pounding on our doors trying to get it done immediately, if not sooner. I was just curious. Hopefully we don't have to go through that again, at least in our lifetime.
I hope you're correct.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Mr. Jones, did you want to add anything to that? Where? Just to the question about the ice storm and adding more contract inspectors and where they came from and.
Thank you. Sandy Jones, Commonwealth Inspection. To answer the question about the ice storm, I had employed 6 electrical inspectors at the time, full-time, and I brought in an additional 8, 2 from the state and from surrounding counties. And of course, we were working from daylight to dark. Weekends, I know there were some people who wasn't satisfied, but man, we done the best we could, and then we got through it. So that's how the inspector came about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then Councilmember James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just needed a clarification either from Brian or Mike. Someone mentioned about potentially looking at a change of Section 4B to give the potential to change where it requires 5 full-time. Is that only if the fee goes into place? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about making that change right now?
Dave Barbary, Department of Law. What's being discussed is in lieu of going with any kind of fee change at all, unless you all wanted us to bid it out again, okay? And part of, maybe this is getting lost in the translation also, my understanding, part of the recommendation not to do a fee change now is because they don't feel like with the comparable numbers, the fees are necessarily what's really out of whack at this point in time. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but in the discussions I had with them, when they did the comparison, you throw out some of the localities that do it in-house, which is most of them that are our size, because the costs are naturally going to be higher for overhead and stuff than what you're going to get with a contractor. So when you look at the comparables from this region, they did not necessarily see a glaring justification to raise the fee rate at this point in time, okay? Where they think there's a legitimate need to assist the contractor at this point in time and to keep him on board for the next few years is we require a minimum staffing level that was based upon the numbers we had in the time frame that we bid it out. And that has gone way down from what it was historically, period, let alone what it was at the all-time high about a year and a half ago. So what can be done at this point in time, we feel, without bidding it out, would be to go ahead and change that section. And what we would do is we would put in some sort of qualifiers so that everyone was, and they have to sign off on it because obviously they're a party to the contract, but it would be an amendment to the agreement, and assuming both sides can reach an agreement on it, what we would do is we would allow them to reduce the number of people that they keep on board. They'd still have to fulfill the level of work, and we would also address the issue that Councilmember Beard brought up about making sure that once we got back to the expected level of permitting that we normally have, we would have at least those 5 people on board, that kind of thing. And, you know, the question is begged, frankly, whether you want to bid it out at all, but this was a means that we saw that we think we could defend of not having to bid it out at this point in time, and hopefully give them enough leeway so that they're not, you know, going to be put out of business as a result of having to keep these people on board that the revenue's gone basically in half of what it was a couple of years ago. So.
I just think that my discomfort committee, and I guess I'll be talking with you, is just it just feels like it should be an RFP process, what we're talking about. It sounds like that we've put certain qualifications in and bid it out as such and had responders, and it seems like we are making an adjustment to benefit the recipient or the contractor. I'm not sure if I'm wording it correctly, and I'm not anti, you know, Commonwealth or whoever the contractor would be. It just seems like that this is a Band-Aid on a bigger problem, and I might need some more time to kind of absorb it, but I want to be okay with it. I'm just feeling like it's not really getting to what really the problem is, and it just seems sort of unfair to those who would have applied from the beginning based on that language change now. Can you make me feel any more comfortable with it, Mike?
Let me start by saying that we felt in no uncertain terms to change the fees now based on the terms of the contract, how the contract is bid and awarded, was not the appropriate thing to do. So if that recommendation didn't come through, I apologize, but we're not recommending a fee change. As we worked through this, we did recognize how work had dropped off. And it came up in our discussions about how, within the contract, we may be able to support a contractor who has done a really good job for us. Within the contract, it has a section that allows amendments, and really work with Dave about what might be appropriate and what we could do. And that's how we came up with that. Certainly, if our contractor has a problem, that problem is not going to go away. We felt the need to see what we could do to mitigate it outside of proposing a fee during the term of the contract. Now, at the end of each year, they can give us notice, and as early as that notice is, the better, that we can get a good RFP out there with doing a good evaluation of the fees and what we're requesting of the contractor to get that all done ahead of time and get another bid out there where the interested parties all have equal opportunity.
Okay. Thank you for that response. You're helping me to see your angle a bit more.
Originally, we were asked to evaluate a proposal that was given to this group as to whether it made sense to do, and it is an old fee. There is no doubt that it has not been raised, and they have taken more than one opportunity to try to request it. Within the history, building inspection has moved and has changed commissioners a number of times, and that may have been part of the problem, is that the new guy coming in, or lady, may not have time to deal with it or whatever, but it continued to be bid and awarded based on that existing price. Then whenever we took the information that we had about fees in surrounding communities and just did a quick look on that new section, the new commercial and new residential, it does not show them, if I could use the term, out of the ballpark. It's very similar to quite a few of our neighbors. So And actually, I think that's whenever you evaluate that fee, you also have to take into account how much activity there is within that fee, which we tried to do that, tried to make it apples to apples as closely as we could. If we want to move forward with the fee, basically, we're not recommending that we do it during the contract, that there is some notice given to end the contract. We would engage a much broader study to take a look at the fees and make a recommendation for an ordinance change, and then bid that out again, do a new RFP, bid it out based on that new fee.
So based on that, if we agree to that, what would be the ending date of the contract?
That would be determined by our contractor.
Okay.
They have to give us notice. I believe the way the contract's written now, it would end, based on the start date, it would run through this calendar year.
Okay. Could we, if the conversation or will was there, could we make an adjustment to item 1 of this agreement and do an amendment of the terms so that it's not a renewable? So that way, if we're saying we're changing something substantive of this agreement, that maybe we should look at not making this a renewable thing so that we're able to then put that back out for RFP? Or do we have the power to end an agreement the same as the contractor does?
You would simply exercise your right to terminate the agreement,
Okay.
if that's what you wanted to do. And the complication on all this is we don't do this in-house, and we have to have somebody outside do it. So you want to make sure you set yourself up so that there's no lag in having the service performed. So if you all were desirous of that, we would want to work with the contractor and have both sides have as much advance notice of that process as possible so that, Mr. Markham's shop has the opportunity to get together with the appropriate people and make sure that the right terms are in the RFP.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is avoid having to go through that process this time, is what we're trying to do, by coming up with this other way of hopefully appeasing them that we think is defensible at this point in time, so that you all could go ahead and use this one for the remainder, either do it on a year-by-year basis like we're doing now for the next number of renewable years, or just assume that it's going to be done for the next, 4 years? The next 4 years, and then 4 years from now, you all have to look at the big picture, which is, are you going to continue to bid this out, period? Are you going to do it in-house? If you're going to bid it out, how do we need to change the RFP at that point in time to make sure that we get as much interest as possible and it's as fair as possible to the people that are doing it? So.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
David, and so included in that is would you be working to exercise 9.2 to change the number of inspectors required? Is that what just to clarify?
What's happened at this point in time is we had an internal conversation where the recommendation was not to increase the fees at this point in time, but to look for an alternative means of trying to get the contractor to stay with us for the next number of years through the term of the agreement. And that was centered on the number of people that they have to employ as a minimum, as well as I think there's some tie-in possibly to the vehicles as well in the RFP. In other words, if they only need 3 people to get the work done, they'd only need to have the corresponding number of vehicles as well. And they have proposed some language that I've looked at with them. We're still in the internal review process on that. If we were comfortable with that as a group and you all were comfortable with a recommendation, our next step would be to make sure we had buy-in from the contractor, because they are a party to the agreement. The contractor may come back to us and say, we'd rather have you just bid the agreement out again and have, increased fees. But if we can work with them on that language, what would happen is at some point in time, there would be a blue sheet that would go to you all for approval where there would be an amendment to this agreement that would accomplish that result.
Councilmember Feigl.
Thank you, ma'am. This is just for my own clarification. So in the contract, is that me? In the contract that they actually, in the contract agreement, are they paid by the inspection, or are they paid a fixed amount total contract?
I believe it's set. we set all of the fees via ordinance, and I believe they're, unless Dewey can correct me, but I believe they're all pretty much based upon, this is the fee you get for this type of inspection, so you're basically paid on a per fee basis.
Per fee basis, but,
I'm sorry, per permit basis.
I mean, per.
Their fee is based upon, in commercial, it's a % of the cost of the job, of the electrical work. They collect that, they keep it all as part of their service. On the residential side, it breaks out into rough-in inspections, final inspections, re-inspections. They charge based on that, as well as there's some per-circuit charges in there as well. And again, it's based on whatever a house is, how it's sized, how many circuits it may have. They charge the base fee plus the circuit charges, and that's spelled out in the fee. And again, they retain all that. They bill the electrical contractor for the inspections. They collect it. They keep all those fees.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Are there other questions? I have one quick one. When you look at the number of inspectors required, are you going to be looking at a ratio? Have you discussed that? I mean, it seems to me this 5 is based on something. So if
The rough has it based upon permitting levels and a percentage reduction. We try to, tentatively, the draft right now has a permitting level, and if it goes below the original permitting level by 20%, which, 100% divided by 5 is 20%, so if it goes below 20%, that would be justification for them to come to building inspection and seek approval to reduce by 1 for each 20% the number of inspectors they would have to leave on board. So we're trying to tie it to a measurable point, and that may be one of the things we would have to go back and forth with them on. What is a fair measurable point? We probably would need to retain, ultimately, because of the way the thing was originally drafted, we would need to be able to approve them doing it before they did it. And then, as Mr. Beard pointed out earlier, we would want to have a mechanism in place so that it was clear that if they started going back the other way, that they would bring the appropriate number of people on board automatically to go ahead and take care of that.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Webb,
Yes, ma'am.
if I understand correctly, what you're asking from the planning committee is to go back and have internal discussions on how to move forward and then go to the contractor with you don't want to rebid right now.
That's
or
correct.
change rates right now.
That would not be our recommendation.
Okay. We did just receive a letter from Steve Vickroy, and
Yes, and that's some information that I thought would be important for you all to take a look at. At the meeting we had November 4th, I believe, I think that was, the majority of that was generated based on that meeting. I think they had become aware that there had been some information had changed on permit fees and other locales, which they included in that information. If you take a look at their proposals, what their proposed fee changes, there are also some adjustments from what you all first saw, and that's what we received January, I believe it's 12th. It was stamped 21, but it was changed to 12. Also, I think another important piece of information is if you go maybe 3 pages from the back, one of the items that I requested from them is their increases that they had seen in their expenses since 2001. I'm not sure how the contractor operates this business, but their expenses have gone up a great deal compared to what they were. However, it's still not a large amount of money when you consider the volume of inspection work that they do. And I think that's one of the things that we can take into consideration whenever you take a look at what's the appropriate thing to do here and the contract, proposed additional increases and then rebid it, try to work with the contractor on how they can control their expenditures. And that, I believe what we are proposing at this point makes sense.
Are there any other questions from council members? When would you expect to be coming back to the committee?
What would you like us to come back with? Our recommendation for a change in that
Well,
section B?
I guess I would ask, first of all, if Mr. Vickroy has any further comment before we go to that, since you did write this letter.
Thank you. My name is Steve Vickroy. I'm an attorney here in town. I represent Commonwealth Inspection. Thank you for allowing me to comment. A couple of things I want to address have come up in today's discussion. First and foremost, this issue about if you enact a new ordinance, which it sounds like may not happen here, but which I still wish to request on behalf of my client, you do not need to rebid this contract. This contract was, and the RFP only sought criteria, as Brian listed. Do you have the ability to staff this? Do you have the ability to maintain the office? Do you have the ability to bond? Do you have the insurance requirements? This was not based on what the fee structure was under the ordinance. And in fact, in 2001, when this ordinance was changed the last time to increase the fees, there was not a rebid of the RFP. The contract was in place and was not needed to be amended in any way. So this body and the council itself does have the legal ability to change the ordinance without reletting a new RFP for this contract. They are totally separate items. And with that, that's what we would request, that the court or that the council consider an amendment to the ordinance as opposed to looking back and making some retroactive changes to a contract. And the reason why are some of the things that Councilmember Beard addressed. We never know when we're going to have something like an ice storm, that which we would need all of the required inspectors. Secondly, we don't know when there's going to be a turn for the better in the economy and be ready to have these inspectors. And in fact, I believe there's a provision in the contract itself that gives us 6 months to replace a contractor because it is so difficult. You know, we were able to find temporary folks during the ice storm, but to actually replace one, if we laid one off and then had to rehire one, sometimes it could even take longer than 6 months because inspectors go out and become contractors themselves and either take jobs or form their own businesses in which they cannot just drop that and come back to work for us. So we would ask this committee to actually look at that a little bit closer than just saying that's truly an option for us, because that is difficult for us to do. And with regard to our fee structure itself and the comparison, I know that first page of what Mr. Crow and Commissioner Webb put forward for you is definitely hard to read. I'll try and just generalize it. Our fee structure right now kind of falls in the middle. And if you look in those revenue projections that they had, that Mr. Crow had actually put up on the board, there were some in which the fees in those other counties were exactly the same as ours. So we actually kind of fall in the middle with regard to all these municipalities. But the difference that we have with those other municipalities are, one, those that have the in-house electrical inspection, they're actually hired by the government. They don't have the overhead costs, they don't have the bonding requirements, they don't have the insurance and the motor pool requirements that we do, because those things are all provided for in a total governmental provision. Their offices are provided for in the governmental office, their motor pool is provided by the government. So with that, I don't think we can actually compare our rates with theirs and say they're equal because of the additional overhead that my client has. And in that letter that I presented to Commissioner Webb, Mr. Crow, and Mr. Markham, you'll see since 2001, since this ordinance was last amended, our fees have, or our expenses have gone up almost 100%, from $21,000 and change to $41,000 and change in the past 7 years. And even if we cut an inspector and we cut a vehicle, that's going to make only a small difference in that $41,000 a month expense that we've got that cannot be made up with the current fee schedule that we've got. So I don't think that just amending our contract to lower our expenses by looking retroactively is going to get the job done. I think we need to look forward, not only for an upturn in the economy, but also for emergencies that come along, and either come up with something that will allow us to have a fee increase or some type of combination of both, either a slight fee increase and a reduction in our contract requirements, but just a reduction in the contract requirements alone, especially with the minor expense of one employee, one vehicle, and the necessary fuel and insurance savings that you have, and that is going to be enough to address the problem that my client's facing. And none of the other counties that have contractual electrical inspections have all of the requirements that we have. You know, this body, when it first came up with this idea in the late 1990s, the contract requirements were obviously safety-oriented. And all of those requirements had a need for safety, both for the government to ensure that these inspections were done, and obviously for our citizens to do that. And I know that asking for fee increases is not something that legislators like yourself are endeared to address. It's obviously a difficult situation, but in the electrical inspection fee area, this is one that your constituents will feel, obviously, some effect on, but in their day-to-day lives, probably not more than 2 or 3 out of 100 citizens would actually do their own improvements and would actually see it. And the increases that would affect them, say for, I think Mr. Crow mentioned a room addition on say a 3-bedroom house. Those that would do that themselves, we're talking about maybe $10, a $10 increase in the cost of those inspections for rough-in and final. So we're not talking a great deal of money in the overall cost of some type of project. And in taking a look at the proposal to that at least the administration has put forward to you, we believe that the contractual amendment provision would not address everything that my client is facing, not only from the difficulty in finding new inspectors when it has to, but also just looking forward at the economic impact that it would have on the community. And further, rebidding this contract, I think, is going to unfortunately raise the specter that the folks that have challenged it every time it's come up for rebid would challenge it again in court. That's unfortunately something that my clients had to deal with. We've had to litigate every single time that this contract has been awarded because these folks have claimed or cried foul because they did not get the award of the contract. And I can guarantee you that if if a new RFP is done and evaluated and Commonwealth is awarded the contract again based on its bid, then Mr. Rice and Mr. Fortney, who were the folks that challenged it each and every time before, will challenge it again. So we're actually possibly buying another lawsuit 4 years or any additional years on the contract that might take place. 4 years down the road, we can put that lawsuit off.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I did want to hear your remarks and response. I have another question from Councilmember Beard. Thank you, Mr. Fitzroy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for allowing me to be busy today. I guess this whole situation about the elasticity of demand and asking the contractor today to staff for something that maybe is not required or needed. And the other side of the coin would be not to have somebody there and have the public and or general contractors sitting around waiting on something to get inspected. Neither are acceptable as far as I'm concerned. So is there any way that there could be a baseline written into this contract or a contract and then allow you to go and subcontract to approved some subcontractors to meet unforeseen volume increases one way or the other?
Well, with that provision in Section 9.2 of the contract, yes, I think that would be possible. That baseline would probably have to have some, at least from the governmental standpoint, some research behind it.
Sure.
And what's absolutely necessary. But, I think anything's possible if the contract has that provision in it that it can be amended to meet the needs of the
I'm thinking
citizens.
going from 5 to 3 is a fairly significant leap, or going from 3 back to 5 is a pretty significant leap also.
I could tell you just from the availability of personnel, yes, that's absolutely correct. But with regard to the overall cost that my client incurs under the contract, our labor costs are approximately 41% of our monthly budget, and 2 staff members then would probably be about a 16 or so % reduction in our cost. So that's not insignificant. There's no question about that. But in looking at the changes since 2001 and the number of inspections, our overall costs, even after that reduction, are significant.
It's got to make sense, obviously, for us and for the citizens, but it also has to make sense for Commonwealth, too, for them to continue to be involved in bidding.
And I also think we need to look forward. There are going to be cost increases in every aspect of what my client does, not just the fact that he has to have a certain number of employees, certain number of vehicles. There are going to be costs across the board in all of those areas that you saw in my client's monthly expense schedule.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzroy.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Council members, how do you wish to proceed? Well, Councilmember Ellinger?
Thank you, Chair. When will you all be able to come back with some information for us? You talked about a couple things that we wanted to look at, and not increasing the fees, but there were some things we could look at the contract. When would you be able to be ready to come back with that?
Are you speaking about the amendment for
Right.
being able to adjust? Because that's the only thing we're recommending.
Right, exactly.
I believe that we could have whatever wording available.
That's difficult to answer only in the sense that we have some current wording that we're probably fairly comfortable with, but on any contractual amendment, you have to have buy-in from the other party, and I don't know how long that process might take to work out that accommodation. So,
Well, can you...
but I mean, we can shoot for the next meeting and
Can we
you
put
know,
this
and I
towards
don't
the
know,
next
do you all
meeting and
want-
see if
do
we
you all-
can-
If you all make that decision, do you want it coming back before you all, or do you just want to blue sheet it as something to go to the council as part of the blue sheet process?
Why don't you bring it back here if you could for next meeting, try to see if we could work with the parties and come back with us?
That makes good sense.
I don't think do I need a motion for that, or I think we just keep it on the docket and just bring it back?
Keep it on the docket. And
That'd be
then-
great. Thank you.
And then if you cannot bring it back by the February meeting, will you let me or Paul Schoniger know?
We can, yes, we can, and we'll certainly be back to report on why we can't bring it.
That would be lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have 2 more items on our agenda, and I'm not sure, Chris, how long yours will take, but let's go ahead and get started. I think this is just for information. We've lost our quorum. We only have, yeah, so we can't have motions. So we are 1 short of a quorum, but you could go ahead and give your presentation.
I think that will work fine for us, and I will try to move this along quicker than anticipated. Didn't realize you had such a loaded item earlier on the docket. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, and before I get too deep into this, I probably ought to give you just a little bit of background. This will be a joint presentation of me from the Division of Planning and also Andrew Grunwald from Engineering, because we are coming to you proposing a piece of legislation that will do 2 things that are very different but are very important, we feel, to the future of the Newtown Pike Extension project and the redevelopment associated with it. What we are going to come to you to talk about is an ordinance that has both, will do some controlling of redevelopment along the corridor and also to control access to the road. A couple of years ago, we did a study as a part of the Newtown Pike Extension project that looked at a lot of these things and where we engaged a lot of folks. And we have come now with this idea as the best way to implement the recommendations of that study. And I will hit some of the details. There has been a concern all along that if we build a new urban highway, as we are talking about with the Newtown Pike Extension, that we wouldn't want it to take an overly suburban character as redevelopment occurs. And with that in mind, we talked about what kinds of standards could be developed that could be applied very readily, not too onerously, that would help us maintain that kind of character. So we knew that we're talking primarily about commercial development, and we did a plan to do that. And again, then what we're here to talk about is how we would implement that. The other thing is that we are making a tremendous investment in the public dollars into a road designed to have a carrying capacity of traffic and to move that traffic around our downtown area rather than through our downtown area. We also intend to have a pedestrian corridor, and we intend to balance maintaining the carrying capacity of that road, and we know that uncontrolled and poorly planned access will compromise that public investment very dramatically over time. So that was another thing that we studied. The study area that we looked at was basically the primary corridor, the Newtown Pike Extension, from north of Main Street all the way along both the corridors and the Scott Street branch of that as well, all the way to the university. And the study was conducted. Our consultants were American Consulting Engineers, who's been our prime on this project, and also for the commercial development standards, CMW was our consultant. In 2007, we had engaged all the property owners along this corridor because we didn't want to blindside anybody with these ideas, and we wanted to have them engaged in this process as well. So we had numerous evening meetings down at the Carver Center, contacted the property owners and the neighborhood association and the folks working from the neighborhood religiously. And in May 2007, this study was completed. I want to just hit a few of the highlights from the study of the kinds of things that we were talking about. We're talking about things like orienting building to the street and parking to the rear rather than having parking lots in the front. We're talking about trying to keep the building facades at the property line to create more of an urban feel rather than having big setbacks. And we're also talking about, as buildings go higher, pulling them back away from the initial facade of the building to make a more pedestrian scale environment. We have recommended word for, except for single-family or duplexes, that all buildings be two-story. We wanted, to the extent possible, that the parking lots would either be behind the buildings, or if they did have to be along the front, they would be screened with a hard type of landscaping, not the usual soft landscaping of bushes and things like that, but again, something to give a very visual and rigid separation visually between the parking areas and the parking lots and the road and the pedestrian areas, and also keep them away from key intersections. We also said if there was any parking structures, that they would be required not to have the parking structures fronting along the road, but they would be required to have commercial frontage in buildings so that we had an interesting street environment. The draft ordinance that we have put before you to suggest as a way to implement this is that all development, except for any single-family or two-family residential, would be required to have a development plan considered and approved by the Planning Commission, whether any other ordinances currently in effect had that requirement or not. And that's the way that these design standards that are contained in that study would be applied. The Commission would be required to study those, and in each development case, apply those studies so that we then, with the development plan and the following construction, would comply with that. And again, this would be additive to the current requirements of the ordinance. I'm going to turn the podium now over to Andrew for just the next few slides, where we turn away from the nature of the development along the road corridor and over to the control of the access, which is much more of an engineering type of function.
So we'll hear from Andrew Grunwald. Welcome.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. I'm going to have passed out this map. It's Exhibit A, and it's on 11 by 17, and it might make it a little bit easier to read. The first thing I'd like to discuss is primarily the access ordinance. Is primarily broken into two parts. There's what we call a fully controlled portion, and then a portion that will be by permit, and I'll kind of get to that in a little bit. First of all, what I'd like to do is I'd like to describe to you the intent of the access ordinance is to ensure that there are no medium breaks, that we don't have any surprises when we actually construct the road, things that we'll have to add in at a later date. We have selected what we call fully signalized intersections, and essentially that's the Newtown Pike and Main Street, Newtown Pike, Manchester, the Newtown Pike, Versailles Road, Newtown Pike, Patterson Street, Newtown Pike and Broadway, and then the Scott Street connector with Limestone Street. On the plan that you just have, those are the intersections that are circled in yellow. They would be fully signalized, and essentially there would be a medium break. Next, we have non-signalized intersections. Now, these essentially would be right-in, right-outs. You have the Scott Street connector. Now, this would go back up to the Norfolk Southern Railroad. They're already an existing operation. We would have to provide them access. Also, you have it on the Scott Street connector and Magazine Street. This would be in, I guess, kind of on the other side, opposite of the Norfolk Southern Railroad yard. Also, the Scott Street connector, we would connect Chair Street and DeRudy Street, where they currently exist. We also have some right-in, right-outs at Merino Street, Spring Street, and DeRudy Street on Scott Street. These would not be medium breaks, and they are designated, I believe, with, I want to say blue triangles. I can't remember exactly. Yes, blue triangles. We also have one additional right-in, right-out. This would be on the Newtown Pike extension, and it would access what is the PDQ market currently. There is some other points I'd like to make, at least on the access. When I say controlled access, that means there would be no opportunity for permit. For instance, once this ordinance goes into place, a developer could not present a development plan to the City of Lexington, and the City of Lexington could not accept a street cut onto the Newtown Pike Extension Boulevard. This would carry all the way over from Main Street to Broadway, and then it would be on the Scott Street connection to the bridge over Broadway. From Broadway to Limestone, access would be given by permit. So you could actually ask for access to be given. And that pretty much, it's pretty straightforward and understandable. I will turn it over to Mr. King to finish up the presentation.
This type of ordinance is not completely unprecedented in Lexington. We patterned this off the Richmond Road Access Movement Safety Ordinance from the late 70s, early 1980s as we drafted this as a way to approach this. There were so many different ways to try to implement this, and we thought the simplest way might be to approach it in this type of fashion rather than coming with overlay zoning or some other kind of tool like that. So what we wanted to do now was, again, before we go back to the property owners and talk to them, we wanted to just expose this to the council and to the planning committee, get a little feedback from you, because we do think it's very important to continue the public communication that we've had on all issues related to the Newtown Pike extension extend to this ordinance. As I said, we had tremendous participation and we had a lot of concurrence on this when we were out there 2 years ago. But given the amount of time that it's been since the study was done in 2007, before we ask you to actually adopt this ordinance, what we want to do is have one more round out there with the neighborhoods and with the property owners. And we wanted that with the comfort level that you all were generally comfortable with this approach, so that we could speak to them with assurance that when we come back to you, hopefully fairly quickly later this spring, that we will have an ordinance that, even though people may have an issue with this or that about it, we will generally have concurrence on it and hopefully can have it adopted hopefully before you go and break this summer. I'm always optimistic. So that'll just wrap it up for me. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have at this time.
Councilmember Blues has a question.
Just a quick question, Chris. Will this go back to, for example, Woodward Heights?
Yes, we'll contact all the property owners along the area and all the neighborhood associations who were involved before. We had quite an extensive list, and I'm sure we'll try to use the Carver Center so we can have an evening meeting in the neighborhood where it's easy for folks to get to.
So Irishtown, Woodward Heights,
the South End Park neighborhood. Yeah. South Hill, all those folks that are all along that corridor that have been a part of this process. Okay. We want to be very inclusive.
Yeah, I think they'll want to be cognizant of this.
We'd be certainly glad to have you vet our list, if you wouldn't mind, sir.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chris, when do you think you might have done these next steps, working with property owners and tweaking the ordinance language? And
well, again,
when do you think you might come back?
Our hope would be that we would be able to do this. As you know, we'll have to do some staffing shuffling. We've lost the person who was our main person on this project right at the end of the year, somewhat unexpectedly. But I don't think it's unreasonable that we could certainly do this over the next month or two and perhaps come back to you March, April. We will keep you informed. Part of these kinds of things just need to take the time, that if folks have concerns, that we respond to those concerns. Our concern is certainly to get it right, more importantly than to get it done by any certain date. We're talking about something that will have a long life through the life of the project. We wanted to get it early before we got into a lot of construction, but we needed to wait till after the record of decision. So, we do have some flexibility on time, but again, if with any bit of luck, we will hopefully have you adopt this ordinance before you go on break this summer. That would be our
So,
plan.
okay, so we'll be in touch about whether you're ready to come back to the committee in March
Yes.
or April.
If that's satisfactory to the
Okay.
committee, I will communicate with you, Madam Chair, when we would request to come back to you.
Okay, does that suit the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the
Appreciate it.
hard work all of you've done on this.
Thank you.
Our final item is the land bank, which Councilmember James put into committee. And Councilmember James, do you want to just say a word about this before we break for work session, to maybe say where you are and what we'll be bringing forward?
Sure. You may remember, and for those of you that weren't here before, Councilmember Feigl, the last meeting we had on this was maybe November, December, I can't remember. And Harold Tate, who's been working on gathering the data for the land bank, let us know that they were working on the interlocal agreement, which is between school system, Fayette County, Urban County government, and the state. And I believe David Barbary can give us the progress of the interlocal agreement. And what I'm thinking he's going to be asking us is whether, once that interlocal is down pat, if he can bring that forward as a blue sheet, or if he needs to come back to committee on that. So I will just yield to David Barbary from Law.
That's great. If you could give us a
We
report.
have reviewed, and they did not get out of our office until the last week or so, but we have reviewed 3 documents that are related to this. There's an interlocal agreement that will ultimately get approved by the Attorney General's office as well. And essentially what you do is you create a not-for-profit corporation. So we've reviewed the articles of incorporation and the suggested bylaws. We have sent those back out to the other 2 parties for review. So as soon as we get those back and have them finalized, either we can have it presented back to the committee, or it would be blue sheeted as Ms. James suggested.
So will you let me know when
Sure,
you
and
have
if
something?
you all want to see them before they get blue sheeted, that's fine, and that's what we'll plan on doing if you want to make that decision today. Or if you all feel like you don't need to see it independently, that's...
I'm seeing heads shake yes.
Okay.
Could you be the very first on our February meeting?
If we have
You
the
have it back.
agreements, I would not intend to bring them to you all until they're basically ready to be signed.
Okay.
Which requires the other input of the parties. So if that's in time for February, that's when it will be. If it's not, we'll let you know and kind of give you an idea of what the issues are.
I sort of hate to delay it a lot, so would the committee be willing to get a written, once you get the interlocal agreement in, maybe you could get us copies, and then this is really the first step that we have to have, and then we could just blue sheet it. I hate to delay it a couple of months.
Well, and Madam Chair?
Yes, Councilmember
To add to
James.
that, in our work session agenda today, you'll see an item of new business which relates to the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and I believe I believe we may need our land bank program in place to receive that funding, and it's a potential of $3 million that I'm sure that has deadlines attached to that. That's something that our Community Development Department is working on. So I would ask that if there was a way to get the information to us in writing prior to, if it's necessary to have the meeting, that's great, but that's my...
Do you want to make a motion just to bring the interlocal agreement straight to blue sheet?
I do. I make
finished.
I make a motion that would it be the law department bringing that forward to them, that the law department bring the interlocal agreement straight through the blue sheet process related to the land bank. Thank you.
So we have a motion on the floor to bring the interlocal agreement, once it's complete, straight to the blue sheet so that the council can...
I can give you some confidence that I don't think the concepts are going to change. Most of the comments we had were with respect to the bylaws. The agreement itself it's pretty standard, and it's what's required by the law. So I don't anticipate that there's major issues with any of the documents. But the agreement is the first step towards getting the whole thing established. So.
Very good. A motion on the floor. Councilmember Beard, it is time for work session, so we'll hear your comment.
I understand it is.
motion.
In fact, it may be not, it's not the motion, but I just wanted to,
We
make a
have a motion on the floor. Did you want to comment about the motion? Since it's open for discussion.
only to the point is that we'll still have an opportunity to
Yes.
review this before it actually would come before council.
Right.
So we wouldn't be flying blind.
Yes. Other comments about the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Nay. No one opposed. So we will hear that straight to the blue sheet process. We will review our items in committee next month, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No one's opposed. We're adjourned.